Hey there, welcome back to another review, this time of The Martian, a 2015 science fiction drama that is directed by Ridley Scott, stars Matt Damon, Jeff Daniels, Jessica Chastain, Kirsten Wiig, Michael Pena, Kate Mara, Sean Bean, Sebastian Stan. It features music by Harry Gregson Williams, cinematography by Darius Wolski, edited by Pietro Scalia, based on the book The Martian by Andy Weir, and it's based on a screenplay by Drew Goddard. And Drew Goddard was originally the first choice to direct the film, but something happened and Ridley Scott ended up replacing him. When it comes to this movie, I have to definitely say I didn't like it nearly as much as a lot of critics did. I know it gets like a 93% out of 100 on Rotten Tomatoes. It gets like a really high, pretty high rating on IMDb. It's considered an Oscar contender. I don't get it. I really don't. I just think that this movie was pretty mediocre for me personally. This is okay. It's decent. It's watchable. It's got some great visuals. It's got some good direction by Ridley Scott. There's some good performances, by Matt Damon and Jeff Daniels especially. But there's just something about it for me personally that just isn't really that memorable, and it's not really the most entertaining film in the world. Like, it has a good sense of humor to it, and the characters are likable enough, but for me personally, it does feel like there's something missing. It feels like there's not enough character development with these characters. So when you have this character that Matt Damon is playing, this guy who's a botanist, a Mark Watney, who ends up being cast away, stranded on Mars, you don't know that much about him. You don't really know about anything about him other than he's a really good botanist and he's a scientist and he's an astronaut. That's really about it. You find some brief stuff that he says, if I do happen to die, let me give this message to my parents, and I'll tell them I love them very, very much. But it seems like he doesn't have a wife, he doesn't have family, and so that doesn't really help. There's other characters, and the film just keeps going back and forth from Mars back to Earth, and the stuff on Earth at NASA is just not very interesting. And the film also suffers from, for me personally, an over obsessive amount of attention to detail to the point where it just alienates the audience. I'm not an astrophysicist. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a botanist. I'm not an astronaut. I'm not an architect and I'm not an engineer. We really don't need to be this scientifically accurate in a film that's essentially science fiction. Um, and the film's running time would have been cut down a lot if they really did cut back on this, in my opinion, an excessive attention to detail to the point where it really starts to take you out of the movie and the film becomes boring. Uh, the film is paced well for about the first hour and a half, but then it starts to tail off and then gets really dull and really boring and really hard to sit through. And the one time the film really started to perk me up was when it started showing a little montage sequence with David Bowie's song Starman. But other than that, it just it just lacked a lot for me. There are a lot of other films about space exploration, science fiction, or based on a true story and otherwise that I liked a hell of a lot more than The Martian. I like Gravity more. I thought Gravity was a better film. It deals with some of the same elements, but it's a lot shorter film. It's faster paced. It's more thrilling. It's definitely a more exciting movie to watch. Um, Mission to Mars. I know a lot of people don't like that movie, but I definitely liked it a lot more than The Martian. Um, and I personally found the story more interesting. And I would also say Apollo 13. Big props absolutely goes to this movie. This film is a much better version of something like The Martian for me. It deals with it's realistic in its approach, but it's not too it doesn't have too much attention to detail, and it spends a lot of its running time building up these characters, and it does a really great job at that. So it makes you care for these characters when they're stranded in space a lot more. And in The Martian, you don't get any of that with Mark Watney. So it's like, why should I care about Mark Watney? Why should I care what happens to him? And with the crew in Apollo 13, you learn to care for these characters because the film actually puts the effort to let you in on them, to actually, I don't know, let you to get to know them a little bit. And that's the thing. You don't really get that with Mark Watney. He just likes to swear a bit, and he's a really great botanist. And he likes to tell Mars to fuck off. He's a likable character enough, but just that's just at the surface. There's not really much underneath. Um, and I also thought the film suffered from a serious case of plot convenience. And for a film that, and that doesn't necessarily bother me that much for the most part, if it's a film that I enjoy and it's a film that is exciting and isn't boring, most of the time. I mean, this film was interesting and I liked watching it for the first half, but I just couldn't get into it for the rest. This is coming from a guy who my favorite film from 2014 was Interstellar, and that film is 20 minutes longer than this movie, which is over 2 hours. This movie's over 2 hours and 20 minutes. Interstellar was 2 hours and 40 some minutes, and I thought that was a better paced film. I thought that moved along at a quicker pace than The Martian did. Um, but that's just me personally. But anyway, you have this what do I mean by plot convenience? Mark Watney is too good of a botanist. He's too good of a scientist to the point where there's almost anything in this film that has to deal with human interaction, he figures it out. He figures that shit out quickly, fast. The only one problem he had was when he almost lit himself on, basically kind of burned himself trying to, light hydrogen on fire. That's really about it. Other than that, he figures everything else out quickly and really accurately without any problems whatsoever. The only problems that he ever had to deal with in this movie were problems that were dealt with the elements. Uh, I mean, that's the thing. Like, he figures out how to heat his lander by figuring out that he needs to use plutonium to heat the lander. It was like, it's like the film just did not, they did not take it to certain things into context in this type of scenario where, yeah, you could be one of the smartest scientists in the world, but when you're put in this type of situation where you're stranded on Mars, you got all these different thoughts going on in your head, and maybe your wherewithal and your thought process is not gonna be as top notch and as sharp as it usually is when you're not in a scenario like this. It didn't really focus that much on stress. The only times and the effects of stress and isolation on his character, the only times you really dealt with that was when he maybe he teared up a little bit when he was able to contact NASA by, typing them, messages and stuff like that. But other than that, it didn't really focus on the effects of stress on this guy. He's talking about fuck you Mars, and I'm doing all this, making potatoes, and I'm a space pirate, and I'm the first man to colonize Mars. It was just, it was like, I don't know. It just felt kind of, Mark Watney at times felt more alien to me than the alien landscape that the film shows in Mars, the shows of Mars. He really did. I can relate to this character. Um, it felt like it kind of wanted to be Castaway on Mars, but it didn't have what Castaway had, which was a character that I could relate to, which is a normal guy. Mark Watney to me kind of appeared like he was super scientist, super space botanist, space pirate. It really wasn't. I don't know. He was a little bit too awesome, if you ask me. Um, and the film also suffered from, like I said, pacing issues, and most of that is because the script was taking forever and taking a sweet ass time catching up to plot points that a lot of its audience, including myself, figured out before the script did. Like, for example, when the Hermes that has to turn around to save Mark, I thought of that the moment I saw the Hermes and it was heading towards Earth. I'm like, why don't they just turn around and go and get him? And then the film spent forever doing these other options and just looking at these other options that I knew were going to fail and I knew they weren't going to do it that way. And it just felt like it was wasting my time. There were a lot of times where I'm watching The Martian and I'm like, get it over with already. Just save Matt Damon. Let's just end this movie because it's getting really, really boring and hard to sit through and just dull and just not very interesting. But yeah, that's the thing. That's some of the main problems I have with the film. I don't really necessarily have an issue with predictability in a film because if I like it, but if it's a film that's just, there is a problem, especially a problem, and even in films that I like, especially it's a problem when I figure out what's going to happen and I'm ahead of the film. It's not being able to predict it that's the big issue for me. It's the fact that I'm able to predict what happens before the film does. And that's if I predict what happens and then the film does it, like pretty soon after I predict it, okay. But if it waits way longer, if it waits like almost an hour, that's a problem. And that's one of the problems I have with this film, one of many. But that being said, there are things about this film I liked. I thought Ridley Scott's direction was really good. It was a nice return to form. It was definitely a lot better than his work in Prometheus or Exodus: Gods and Kings or things like that. It was definitely a return to form for Ridley Scott. The cinematography was gorgeous and visually breathtaking. It was probably some of the best footage I've ever seen in the Martian landscape. It was gorgeous. The film was really a sight to look at. Um, and I did like pizza little bits of the score because it was a nice 80s synth throwback stuff I liked. I liked the 70s disco music soundtrack and the nice use of David Bowie's Starman. It's bittersweet now knowing that he's no longer with us, but it works really well in the film. And for the most, I did like Matt Damon's performance, but it's his character that there's a lot lacking for that character for me personally. I just didn't think he was, I don't know, wasn't a very relatable character to me. And I like Jeff Daniels, and his performance was good, but he really didn't have that much to do. He was just a NASA guy. It was nice to see that Sean Bean wasn't an asshole for once, and he didn't die. That was nice. Uh, Jessica Chastain and Sebastian Stan and Michael Pena do a good job for what they're asked to do, but they don't have that much to do. Um, the visual effects are impressive, but they should be. The film costs a lot of money to make. And it just it was there. I was okay. Like I'm glad I watched it once, but this is not a film I have any desire to ever watch again, to be honest. Um, a little bit disappointing considering all the good reviews that I've seen when it comes to this movie and all the high praise it's gotten. Um, I like the trailer. And I don't know, it just something about it just didn't translate well for me. But that's just me personally. I mean, uh, there are a lot of people that like this movie, and that's cool. I just wasn't one of those people. I just wasn't a big fan of this. I didn't hate it though. I just thought it was okay. I felt the same way about this as I kind of did about Star Wars: The Force Awakens after a second viewing. There were things about it I liked, there were a lot of things that I didn't, and so it ended up meeting in the middle. It was just one of those, okay, it was all right. Um, I just personally think The Martian was a little bit too long. It lacked a lot in character development, and yeah, there were a lot of characters that were just there, and we didn't know that much about them, so it kind of felt like, why, who cares? There's a lot of that feeling, like, who cares? And I got to the point where I'm like, why do I even care if he gets rescued? I mean, that's a problem when you're like, why do I care if he gets rescued? Like, he's the first man to colonize Mars. He doesn't really have a family to go home to other than his mom and dad, which, you know, hey, it is what it is. But it's like, what is at stake here? In Apollo 13, they had failed their mission, and you know They needed to come home. Like they didn't get to go to the moon. They didn't get to be a space colonist. They didn't get to do any of that. They were either gonna come home after they failed their mission, or they're gonna fail their mission and die in outer space. With the Martian, it's like even if he dies, he's gonna be remembered for history. He's gonna be remembered in history books for years to come, for decades, for generations, as a man, the first man to colonize Mars. I mean, so yeah, it's kind of non inconsequential at times, with the suspense that this movie had. I think a large part of it is because it drug it out way too long. I think somebody I know on Facebook, they'd let me know. I think it would have been better if it was just like Castaway and it was more just Mark on the planet by himself. And in a way, it might have been a better film. I think it might be more engaging. I usually found that stuff to be the most interesting stuff. Even though that character I kind of didn't relate to, I still liked watching the scenes with Mark because I liked Matt Damon and I liked his performance. And I loved seeing the stuff on Mars. When it went back to Earth, that's where it lost my interest. I didn't care. It didn't really, it wasn't that interesting. It wasn't that exciting. It was just a whole lot of who gives a shit. I think they could have really cut those scenes down. It really would have helped the film a lot. Um, because to me, it feels like it's two different movies. It's the movie on Mars with Mark Watney trying to survive, and it's a movie about NASA on Earth trying to find a way to help Mark and trying to save him. And I just think it would have worked better if it was just, pick one or the other. Um, but I know films like Apollo 13 have done both those aspects of it, but it just seems like Apollo 13 did it so much better, where it didn't feel like it was two different movies. It felt like it was just one film and one story. This didn't feel that way to me. It felt disjointed, and I don't know if that's the writing. I don't know what it is. I just the adaptation of the book, which I haven't read, but anyway, I really don't know what else to say about The Martian, except I guess at the end of the day, I was okay. And if it's a rated 5 stars, give it 3 out of 5. It's a decent film. It's okay. I guess I could call it a time waster at best, but I don't know. I mean, it's a film. Maybe with more viewings, it might get better or it might get worse. It's just one of those films that, yeah, I just. So anyway, thank you for watching my review, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I will see you guys later. See ya.